Good morning, everyone. I am Dan Robbins, and this is just a class I've taught agents many times since 2016. We started to have inventory issues in Chester County, Pennsylvania. So it's been, I mean, we're like going on 10 years of inventory shortage, which is insane to say. And I know different parts of the country are different, but if you're in an area that's still competitive, which ours is, this should be helpful and feel free to throw in your 2 cents along the way. But I'll just jump right in. First things first, prepare your buyer for the marketplace, right? I always say an informed client is the best client. Sometimes that takes time. Like buyers have to throw a couple of agreements against the wall to see what works and what doesn't. Make sure that they have a BFI, buyer's financial information, ready to go. Obviously, pre-approval letter, connect them with the lender. Um, a letter of interest, no pics, please. We saw some fair housing issues with pictures and letters. That's like a letter from the buyer to the seller telling them how much they love the house. Also, letting your buyers know where the market is currently versus where it likely will go. Um, you know, a lot of times buyers, I see them kind of like, oh, you know what? I'm going to wait until interest rates drop, or I'm going to wait. But the danger with that, of course, is that values are going to increase when interest rates drop. So it's a smarter move many times to buy when interest rates are higher and then enjoy that equity gain when interest rates ultimately drop. I'm having that conversation with some investors right now that are really, and I'm really turning their heads a little bit because that's actually a supply that's increasing in our area, investment properties. Um, so once the property is found and your buyer is interested in it, call the listing agent, gain rapport. All of us that have a modicum of experience, there's a very good chance that I'll know the person on the other side. Um, and I want them to feel secure because the biggest concern that agent has is going under agreement and then having to go back to market for some reason. So you want to express to them like this is the best house your client's ever seen in the universe, right? Like they love it so much. You want to ask the listing agent what the most important thing is to the seller. Outside of purchase price, obviously, outside of pricing, what's the most important thing? Closing date, a lease back, offering free lease backs. I've won deals that way. Find out how many offers they have in hand, find out the deadline, get as much information as you possibly can, but also, again, grow rapport with that agent so that agent has confidence in you moving forward, and your buyer. Um, Purchase price in PEA. I don't know if you guys have this in other areas. If you don't, you should create one. We have a PEA, a price escalation addendum. That PEA says our buyer will pay X amount more than any other buyer up to X amount. And it also demands proof of the other offers, which is really makes your buyers a little more comfortable with it versus just throwing darts in the dark to see if your offer wins. Um, CMA for the buyer when you're analyzing pricing, you're looking back 6 months to show value. Don't forget about year-over-year appreciation in your marketplace. So know where prices went from 23 to 24, 24 to 25, so that you can estimate where they're going from 25 to 26. Um, you could be caught in yesterday's marketplace and miss out on a house for your buyer that way. Um, and then the question I always pose to my buyer, because they're asking me, well, what's the highest end of the PEA? How far should I go with this? And I always ask them, imagine if the home were to sell at a certain price point and you feel okay losing it at that price point, and then maybe push it a little bit further than that, kind of coach them in that direction. I'm telling you, I'm having these conversations right now. buyers regret not getting a house. And they might not tell you, but then all of a sudden they kind of go quiet on you and they feel discouraged. And then all of a sudden they execute an extra year to their lease and they're like, you know what, we're just going to rent for another year. And you're like, oh man, okay, well, I'll touch base in 6 months or whatever the case may be. Um, so that question is very important. And you might even want to prepare your buyer with that question early on in the process too. So they start thinking along those lines. Um, Contingencies. Be wary of waiving inspections for big ticket items in our area, stucco and septic. I'm always very concerned. I want my buyers to know what the worst case scenario is in those situations, and it can be expensive. I mean, septic systems can run anywhere from 20 to $50,000 plus, and stucco I've seen 150, $200,000 stucco remediations. So when they're waiving inspections and the house is 100% stucco, you need to be very careful about how you handle that situation. Um, we do have inspectors in our area that offer walkthroughs with their buyer. It's a less expensive. They might charge them like 150 bucks to walk through the home while the home is still on the market to give them kind of like some comfort level with some basic. It's not a detailed inspection. They have to sign off on a bunch of stuff, but at least it gives them like, hey, this house isn't falling down around me, kind of that little level of security that might help them pull the trigger on that. Um, no cash, no problem. You can still waive the mortgage contingency, but there is a buyer beware here. Um, your earnest money deposit could be sacrificed if for some reason they can't get their loan. So you better make sure that lender's locked in. Let that lender know what you're doing, why you're doing it, and have a when I'm working with a buyer, I am tied in with their lender. Like the lender and I know who each other are and we're working together. And if I don't know who that lender is, I find out who that lender is because that relationship is very, very critical in order to be successful. Um, and then the association in Pennsylvania, we have the HOA and condo association laws. It requires the seller to furnish those documents to our buyers, and then our buyers have 5 days to review. Up until receipt of those documents and 5 days thereafter in PA, I don't know how this is in other states, but I'd love to hear about that. Um, the buyer can terminate for any reason and get their deposit monies back. So it's like this free look. So when my buyers are looking in an association, I'm like, yeah, fire your guns. We're going to be fine. We'll have time to let this settle in and make sure this is the right decision after you win the deal. Um, Earnest money deposit, EMD. I always tell my buyers, don't be shy here. This is a big step in the process and it can win the deal. If a buyer's buying like a $500,000 house and they're putting 20% down, they're taking $100,000 out of their pocket one way or the other at close. All they're doing is losing that interest on $100,000 from execution to close. So even if you apply a 10% interest rate to it over 45 days, you're looking at around $1,230. I mean, think about that. It's like you're buying a $500,000 house or whatever the price point is, and you're saying to your buyer, would you have paid 1,200 more dollars to win that deal? And then they put $100,000 in earnest. Like that doesn't make any sense. Max out your EMD. It is makes the buyer feel uncomfortable, but when you show them what they're actually losing, it makes them feel a lot more comfortable about it. So yeah, these are my tips and tricks. I'd love to get people's feedback and take on this, especially from other states. Um, Trying to think if I missed anything here, but I think I hit just about everything, and might be the quickest class I've ever taught. I don't know. Does anybody have any questions for me?
Yeah, I do. When we go down to the mortgage
Yeah.
contingency, the finance, you said no cash, no problem. You can still waive that contingency. I had some buyers who weren't even thinking about buying. So at the last minute, they had a home to sell. So we didn't do the home sale contingency, but they got the bridge loan, and so there was contingency for that. There's no way we can get around that, correct? It was so fast for them that they had to have that contingency. Is
Yeah, so you can waive the mortgage contingency even if you're doing a bridge loan, but what the EMD, the earnest money deposit, is not protected.
okay.
So that's what you have to be clear to your buyer about. You have to have this thing as a slam dunk. Like it has to be very clear. Otherwise, their EMD, if there's no association, especially, their EMD is just floating out there.
Okay.
Becomes basically non-refundable when you start waiving all these contingencies, right? So you have to be very careful about how you approach it. And you need their lender in tow, you know.
Yeah. So
Now
the lender
maybe
has to agree to waive that
well,
contingency.
the lender doesn't have to agree to it, but you have to let the lender know what you're doing. It's the buyer's
Mhm.
decision ultimately.
Okay.
The buyer has to understand that if they can't get the loan for some reason, that they could lose their EMD.
Okay. All
That
right.
as long as that buyer now, it's not everyone feels comfortable enough to do this. Another thing too that my buyers do all the time is they go find a family member that has you know, some type of, equity portfolio that's they're willing to write a gift letter, then you can actually do a true cash offer. But the buyer's still going to go get a loan anyway. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay.
Thanks.
And in our agreement of sale in PA, they just changed it so you can actually elect waiving mortgage contingency, but my buyers are still getting a mortgage. Like it's actually an option in the agreement. Um, Before it just said the buyer can get a mortgage if they want to or not, but now it's actually an option for them to pick versus like a true cash purchase where they're saying we're not getting a mortgage for this property. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I just thought if they were getting that mortgage, the lender had to be in on it. I mean, they had to okay it, I guess.
Yeah, well, they don't need to okay it necessarily for the buyer to feel comfortable with it, but they certainly should. I mean,
Okay.
if I'm a buyer and I'm putting $100,000 down in earnest money, I want to be locked in on my loan at that point.
Right. Okay.
You know? Versus
Yeah.
floating around. If you're doing a home sale contingency in our marketplace, it's
Mhm.
almost impossible right now for that to happen. It
Right.
happened a lot in 2010, 11, 12, 13, 14. Things started to turn in 15, and then 16, they started to go away because inventory started to drop in our area. So once it becomes a seller's market and becomes competitive, home sale contingencies become impossible, or
Yeah.
very, very unlikely, you know. Now we are starting to see moments where the buyers are having a little bit of power, but it's still very much a seller's market in our area for the most part. And I know that's shifting in certain marketplaces, but the reason I wanted to teach this class is because my agents need a refresher on this, I think.
Well, yeah, me too.
But it's really the biggest thing for me, I think, is if you're scrolling up, is the listing agent and the relationship with the listing agent. You know, they're the ones that are communicating to their seller and advising their seller on what their seller should accept or not. And if they're comfortable with you, that's a big win in the right direction. Now, of course, your buyer still has to be competitive on purchase price. That's the ultimate thing. But then there are other things that come into play. Um, for instance, and I should have added this in, you can win by paying both sides of the transfer tax. In Pennsylvania, that's 1% to each side. But a buyer can offer to pay both sides. So for a $500,000 purchase, it increases their closing cost by $5,000. And that might make it clear. I also think if your buyer is getting a loan and you're using a price escalation addendum, you need the difference between the what they're going to overpay. So in other words, our PEA says our buyer will pay X amount more than any other buyer, right? Up to Y amount. Okay. So let's say the house is listed for $500,000 and our buyer's willing to go to 550. I always tell them assume there's a cat you're up against a cash offer. So if you have a mortgage contingency and There's nothing you can do about that. You can waive the appraisal so the buyer will cover any appraisal gap, but they still need a loan contingency because it's not locked in, right? Assume the other buyer is cash that you're up against and make that differential in the PEA large enough to make that seller think about that. Does that make sense? Like if you come in with a PEA and you say, we'll beat any other offer by $1,000, then the seller might say, well, that's not worth it. I'm just going to take this cash offer for X. I'm going to take this cash offer for 525 because that seller's only going to go to 520 or that buyer's only going to go to 526. But if you make that 5,000 or $10,000, now that cash buyer's at 525, but your buyer's at 530, 535, five or $10,000 higher, and it's going to make the seller think twice about that. Does that make sense? So you always are kind of like putting your feet in the shoes of the seller, making sure you're thinking through the seller's lens, so to speak, when you're going through all of these points in the agreement of sale. This question for buyers has worked so many times for me. I can't tell you. Like, would you, are you, if this house sells for 550, you're okay. And then they kind of look at the husband, if it's a couple, they'll look at each other, they'll talk about, all right, we'll go to 555. Like you'd be surprised. Like they're like, wait a second, we would buy this house at 550 or we would buy it at 575, whatever that number is, when it's framed in the way of if it sells in a different direction, because you're showing them loss at that point and it becomes something emotional, because it's going to be real in a minute, you know? And of course, we all know the first and second time on this is a kind of a learning experience for buyers in a competitive market. Usually takes them 3 to 4 offers in to like understand, okay, I got to throw down here to win this deal. If that makes sense. Um, let's see, I'm just going back through here to see if I can think of any. Does anybody have any questions for me? And then at the end of the day, you use all these tools. Your buyer still might not be high enough to win the deal, but at least they put their best foot forward. And I use that language all the time because you don't want your buyers to get into a frame of mind where maybe this isn't the right agent for us. Maybe, this isn't the right time for us. No, let's just keep moving forward. You know what I mean? You want to almost, okay, you lost it, but we did the best job we could. Let's move on to the next one. You know,
I
you
think
will,
it's important to let your buyers know, especially if it's competitive, that they have one shot at it.
yeah,
That
very likely.
that makes it real to them.
Yeah, yeah. And usually what I say is like they might come back, but there's no guarantee of that.
Mhm.
And we all know, like, let's say that's like 10 offers in on a property. They'll probably, the conversation, when the listing agent ghosts on you, you're not even close, right? Like if the listing agent is non-correspondent with you, when they're corresponding with you, it means you're right there. I just had a deal too where I had a cash buyer waiving everything and they went up to 820 and the agent called me and said, Dan, 830 and it's theirs. And I went back and they're like, no, 820 is our highest. And they lost it, you know, but they had that last chance to get it. And they aren't unhappy about it. But they went to what they thought was they didn't want to go higher than that number for whatever reason that they have, you know. But they had an opportunity. And I think that's the key, giving your buyer an opportunity. That's why it drives me crazy when buy sellers take sight unseen offers and it just goes away before it even ever allows any showings because then your buyer never had an opportunity to get the house. I'm almost saying to my buyers, look, I know this is coming soon. They're not allowing showings yet. It could sell and coming soon. There is a chance that that can happen, especially for newer construction. Like if a house is less than 10 years old, then a buyer might say, you know what, we're just going to buy it because we know that the house is going to be in decent shape. And who knows, maybe it's in an association and they're going to have a chance to do that walkthrough before they get those docs finished, which I've done many times, where you're like, let's lock it down and then use that association clause in PA. And Suzanne, where do you practice?
I'm in Northern Virginia,
Okay.
and I had that exact experience where I had a really hot property, and somebody came in, offered sight unseen. They wanted us to accept the offer. I didn't. I actually I actually told my sellers, they could, they could lose it on the association docs, and that association would take a long time to get the docs, so it would be on hold, on hold, on hold. So they made the decision to not take the offer and just put it on the market, which was the correct decision.
And did those buyers end up winning the day or did it?
They did not.
Oh, how about that?
Mhm.
See? Yeah. And what I think it is too is sometimes is there's some nefarious things that happen in our office or even with like dual agency, which is still legal in Pennsylvania. Um, but you know, if it goes in a completely different direction and it's an agent from a different office and it's not dual agency, then it's like, all right, well, that agent just stabbed at it and won, and they had a buyer that was maybe desperate to find something in that marketplace, you know? Um, but I've, even with these buyers I just spoke about, they've put in offers prior because I got them into the listing somehow. I worked them, so I got them in before it hit the open market through relationships I have with agents and everything else. And they've offered before it goes to the market, over ask, waiving everything. And both of those times, the agent was like, "Damn, we're just not going to do that. We're going to wait." And both of those times, they ended up getting more. So I think the agents that do that aren't really, it's not in the best interest of the seller not to wait in those situations, in my opinion. Yeah.
I agree. To everybody who's in the Northern Virginia market, there's a new law on the books about HOA docs. I don't know what it's like in Pennsylvania, Daniel, but here, the HOA, when it's requested, they have to send it to you within 14 days. They can't ask you for a ratified contract anymore, and they can't ask you to wait for this, and this, so that it pushes getting those documents way out, and your sellers are just kind of sitting there waiting. So that's something pretty new here.
Yeah. So in our agreement of sale, it says they have to be ordered within 10 days. Now, when I'm on the listing side, it's the most important thing. It's
Yeah.
'cause it's the biggest loophole in the contract. So when I'm listing a house that's in an association, I'm like, order those docs immediately. And if it costs extra money to get them quicker, pay it, you know?
It's just
Because
some of these
we need to get
HOAs
those
won't let
docs
you.
to the
Yeah.
other side to get that clock ticking on. Is it a 5 day rescission period for you guys?
Well, it's anything right now.
No,
They
from receipt of the docs, I mean.
Yes,
They have a
it's
5 day.
zero to whatever. Yeah, they changed that. It used to be 3 days mandatory, but now it's anything. But the thing about it is our
Oh, you can
HOA,
actually put in your own number there. Oh,
yeah.
how about that? Okay.
These HOAs are not. Oh, they say, okay, you can't order your docs until you have this, and it's the HOAs holding it up.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah. Yeah, that's irritating.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, for us, it's just these HOAs, the management companies are so big. And actually they do a better job than in the smaller, like sometimes you run into that where it's like 15 single houses and it's on a self-run HOA and one of the owners of the house is in charge of furnishing documents and they're not very organized about it. So it takes them longer. Like you kind of almost have to keep reminding them like we need these documents. But yeah, and it doesn't matter. Like it could just be a small management agreement on some type of common area. The law applies the same in Pennsylvania. Up until receipt, then the buyer has 5 days to review. That's what I was asking you, Suzanne. How long is that review period by the buyers in Virginia? Or does that change?
It's changed from 3 days mandatory that they get to zero to whatever days.
Oh, okay. So it's negotiated.
It's negotiable. Mhm.
Got it. Okay. Interesting. I like that. But then that makes it so that then that's another point of negotiation.
It is.
So if you want to win the deal, you're putting zero in there.
Yeah, and even if you put zero, you get till 9 o'clock that same day to
Oh,
look
okay.
at
So
stuff.
it's at
Yeah.
least one day.
Yeah.
Yeah, got it. Interesting. You cannot change it in Pennsylvania. And I've seen agents redline it, like they'll redline it out of the agreement, but that's just a disclosure telling you what the act is. It's not. It's not part of the agreement necessarily. It's just a disclosure letting both parties know, hey, if it's in an HOA, hey, if it's in a condo association, these rules apply. That's why it's a 50 Act 5407 or Act 5307 in Pennsylvania, depending if it's homeowners or condo. But it's interesting. Anyway, um, yeah, I mean, if you follow all of these rules and like really hone in on this, your buyer might not win the deal, but at least they'll know they put their best foot forward, and that's what's most important. They're looking for you as the expert to be their fiduciary and helping them achieve their dreams, you know? So, um, anyway, that's all I got on this subject. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dan.
No problem.